Good evening, everyone. Namaste. Shri Ganeshai Namaha. Probably a big obstacle that we've been working against for the past several months seems to have been lifted, if not permanently, at least temporarily. And so we're here to discuss, how we got here, what's next, and other interesting things. I'm Suhag Shukla. I'm the executive director of the Hindu American Foundation. I'm joined tonight with my colleague Samir Kalra, managing director of programs and policy, Anita Joshi, our director of policy research, Ramya Ramakrishnan, who is our outreach director, and probably a number of other people from the HAF team. We know a lot of questions came through prior to our webinar through the registration process. So we will be trying to get through those, as well as questions that you have that you put through the Q&A feature. As always, we will be recording tonight's program. And by participating, you agree not to record, share, or otherwise disseminate the presentation in whole or in part without the express written permission and consent of the Hindu American Foundation. The past couple months, I don't even know how to describe them. We at HAF have been drilled down on working against SB 403 day and night. I'll just give an example of when I got the news, and I'll just share that. I was on vacation last week, a much needed vacation, and I had really hoped that there had been a decision by Governor Gavin Newsom, at least prior to when I left, but it didn't happen until the last day of vacation. But every day I would wake up with kind of a lump in my throat. And even before I did my morning pratna or prayers, I would pick up the phone, and we have a Slack channel where we coordinate our work at HAF, and I would open up our California Caste Bill channel, just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And that pretty much started from the day, first day of vacation, all the way to the last day. And it wasn't until a few hours before we boarded our flight that I got a phone call from someone who had gotten direct word from the governor by text that he was going to veto the bill in the next hour. And I had to have that person repeat it to me 2 times because I was really in disbelief. The way that this bill kind of was rushed through the state Senate and the Assembly, we were preparing for this bill to also breeze across the governor's desk, but he did the right thing, and we're really grateful to that. Aside from just the day-to-day worries about what was going to happen, I think the key thing for all of us was really going back to our tradition: do the best that you can, and that's all you can do. And that really came in handy for all of us, because every single day, whether it was on social media, whether it was through our inboxes, or whether it was through the media, we were being painted in a manner that is not honest and true to who we really are. We were called bigots. We've been called Hindu nationalists, and a number of other things. So, some of our staff have been told to go back to our country. We'd like to respond, but we won't, to tell them that this is our country because we live here and we were born and raised here. But that's besides the point. I think it's important that we delve into a little bit of how we got here. So Samir, just kind of share where you are in your mind space. I know we've talked about this, that it's still hard to kind of take in, but a lot of work was done to get to where we are right now. So why don't you share that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Suhag, and namaste, everyone. It's great to be with you. As we like to say here, or I like to say here in California, over this last weekend, we conquered 2 evils, the caste bill and the Cowboys. And that's for you 49ers fans. We gave a thumping to the Cowboys over the weekend, and we thumped this bill, SB 403, as well. So it was a great, victorious weekend for all of us. I would say it's still a little surreal. Has it fully set in? I think Suhag called me Saturday morning. I was taking my daughter to dance class. I was waiting outside and she kept calling and she's like, pick up the phone or call me ASAP. I was like, oh no, what's going on? And then she gave me the news and I really couldn't believe it because the last probably what's now 8 months has been a roller coaster ride. A lot of work, a lot of long nights, weekends, and struggles and emotional ups and downs. But I think, what really makes me feel good about this process is that the community really came together. And I think before we go any further in terms of what we did and what our journey was like at HAF, I really want to thank and acknowledge the broader Hindu American community, all the organizations who are too many to name for their role, again, for doing the same thing day and night, working on this bill, all the community leaders, the organizations, the temples, the families that have sacrificed their days and their work, taking time off from work to work on these things, making several trips up to Sacramento to give their testimonies, coming to public rallies. So it's been really amazing to see how the community has really galvanized and come together on this issue and really fought back against this discriminatory and racist bill. Also want to thank some of our allies and partners, particularly from the Jewish community, that did help us as well. And our hearts go out to them right now, that they're going through a very difficult time with brutal terrorist attacks in Israel that happened also over the weekend, unfortunately. So it was a little bit bittersweet as well. So again, thank you to them and our other allies that stood with us along this journey too. We wouldn't have been able to do it without those collective voices. And then, of course, besides the governor, there were legislators that did stand with us that said clearly no, that this bill is discriminatory, it's unnecessary, and it's going to put a target on our backs as a community, and they stood with us. Others, abstained. Now, was that our ideal? We would have liked them to voted no along the way, but they didn't. They abstained, and but at the same time, they worked behind the scenes and in other ways to help move the ball forward on this and educate other lawmakers and write letters to the governor alongside organizations, tech leaders, business leaders, business organizations. Many others also stepped forward to write letters to the governor, to try to get meetings with the governor's office, and also along the way through the Assembly and the Senate process. So a huge thank you to all of them. There were other legislators that helped to try to find solutions. Evan Lowe, Assembly members Evan Lowe and Alex Lee, tried to move this when it was in the Assembly site to try to put a pause on the bill. They moved it. They moved the ball forward as well. So there were a lot of people that played different roles and kind of helped us get to where we are today. But of course, at being part of HAF, I'm a little biased and would like to think that HAF played a major role in this as well. And so just, to talk a little bit about, where we have been at, for the last 8 months and what we've been doing, I just want to share a little kind of summary and synopsis of some of the actions that we've taken. This is probably not necessarily encompassing everything we've done. But this is just a little bit of snippet of, the amount of time and effort that we put in. So first of all, between the four of us, myself, Ramya, Suhag, and Anita, we've literally been spending, 8 hours a day at least, every day over the last, 32 weeks, focus on this. Then we've had many other staff, team members, our social media team, our volunteers, other staff members, our regional directors, and others that have been working tirelessly, our marketing team, our development team. Everyone collectively has been working on this, and the hours are innumerable that we've spent on this. And kind of what we've been able to build out of that has been pretty amazing. We've sent more than 7 official opposition letters and drafted dozens others that other groups have been able to use. We've sent out 9 grassroots action alerts where thousands of people actually sent messages. And to be exact, almost 22,000 messages were sent through those action alerts. We've had over 40 meetings by HAF staff officially with senators, assembly members, their staffers, with the governor's office, and with others to educate them on this issue and to try to advocate for our position. We've been able to get questions asked during the Senate and Assembly Judiciary Committee hearings. I was privileged enough to be one of the lead opposition witnesses for the Assembly Judiciary Committee hearing, where I was able to give 2 minutes of testimony there. We obviously helped to draft testimonies for other people that were able to or help to kind of work with some of the witnesses during the Senate hearing as well, Judiciary Committee hearing. We have sent over 30 probably messages. Almost 300 messages. I read that wrong. Almost 300 messages through WhatsApp, trying to get the community engaged, getting them to take action. We've had numerous community planning calls that we've been part of with other groups. We spent 300 plus hours just on one-on-one phone calls, and Ramya has really done a lot of that work in terms of just talking to people individually, whether it's supporters, whether it's people that just have questions on how they can get involved and what they can do. We've had, I think today is our 6th webinar or training that we've done. Anita has created 3 toolkits. Suhag has created a legal memorandum on this. Our communications team, Matt and others, have put out 10 plus press releases. We've fielded and responded to over 20 media inquiries. We've, drafted, as I mentioned, over a dozen letters for other organizations. We helped, along with other groups, to put on a public rally where we had 300 or so people attend in Sacramento on a hot, sunny day, Saturday. We have obviously, as I mentioned, put in a lot of time and effort, not just in America, but in not just in California, but in other states and other countries. Suhag was very involved in when this came up in Canada at a local a district there, a local area there, and she gave a briefing to the community. She helped draft correspondence and toolkits and testimonies. So as you can see, it's been a real collective effort on our team. And while we've been doing this, the other work hasn't stopped. We just are coming off a human rights conference in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago, where we brought people from across the world to talk about a number of issues. We've continued to put out podcasts on timely topics. We're continuing to revamp our education materials. We're currently hosting Pakistani Hindu human rights activist Ramesh Jaipal on a countrywide tour. Dozens of locations across the country we're hosting him. We've set up probably close to 30 or 40 meetings with congressional offices, State Department, think tanks, etc. So other work doesn't stop. What we've been doing on SB 403 has been on top of that. And so it's really been an amazing journey, but glad to see where we are now after a really a tough path that we've had to go through. While we've talked a little bit about what we've done so far, I think it's really important to talk about what comes next, because the battle is definitely not over. This is not the first time the last time we're going to see a bill like this coming up, whether it's in California or other places. We've obviously seen it already popping up in other cities. So just to talk a little bit about that, I want to pass it on to our policy extraordinaire, Anita Joshi, who is our Associate Director of Policy Research in Washington, D.C., to talk a little bit about what comes next from a legislative perspective and kind of a proactive approach.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Samir. A lot of questions that we've been getting from the community is, how do we show our appreciation to Governor Newsom for vetoing this very racist, hateful bill? So we know some community orgs have started some campaign petitions. We definitely encourage you all to sign on them. Another great way to show your appreciation is on social media. Tag the governor, Governor Newsom, and the governor's office, and say thank you for standing with the Hindu American community and vetoing SB 403. Also, the governor's contact page. You can definitely, we'll end up dropping the link later. You can just fill out a short little message and it'll go straight to the governor's office and he'll see your thank you. So there are a lot of different means to just show your appreciation. And it's really important that as a community, we do that to show that, hey, we recognize when our elected leaders are listening to us and take action. We appreciate, we notice, and we care, and we feel heard and represented. Furthermore, HAF will be submitting a formal thank you letter on behalf of us and other organizations and other members. basically thanking the governor for his work and for making the correct decision. As I think both Assembly and Senate committee analysis stated, both sides, whether you were supported or opposed SB 403, agreed caste is already covered under existing law. And Governor Newsom reaffirmed and reacknowledged that. So that's wonderful. Now, what comes next as far as on the legislative level? A few different things throughout this whole summer and continuing. One of the biggest parts of my job is basically monitoring legislation. We subscribe to about 4 or 5 different very, very expensive pieces of software that help us track and communicate with state legislators and their offices to track bills, so we know at a moment's notice when a bill is going to be heard for a hearing. When there's been an amendment, we can see what the text of the amendment is. And so we've been tracking for when caste appears along with other search terms. And so as that issue has come up, we've been engaging with the state legislatures in those respective states. For example, in Oregon earlier this year had a bill that was introduced that was even more egregious, and so I would argue, than almost as egregious as the original SB 403, if not took it a step further. And so we worked with Hindu American community organizers in Oregon and kind of worked with them to advocate and engage in conversations with the state legislature. And ultimately, the author of the bill decided not to push the bill any further after having these conversations. Let's see, what else have we done? And we've also, just as it's come up in, just other informative conversations, proactive conversations with state legislatures, building relationships in different states with different community leaders, and kind of teaching everyone, we can't do it all alone, right? It really takes a village to learn how to advocate. And so we've definitely been working on putting together a toolkit for all of you who are outside of the state of California, for you guys to take those materials and approach your own state representatives and proactively educate them about caste, proactively educate about what the issue is, what are the group's motives, what are the lies that are being spread about Hinduism, what is the truth about Hinduism, those sorts of issues. But as I mentioned earlier, we subscribe about 4 or 5 different softwares, and it is very, very expensive. We think it's important and crucial to be able to do our work properly and be able to support the community. So any support you all can offer to help cover those expenses of these software tracking would be immensely, immensely grateful. I'm really cheesy, so if you want to donate, $40.30 or $403 or some variation of 403, just like in honor of our work on this bill, that would be wonderful. I'm now going to pass it over to Suhag to kind of talk a little bit more about some of the legal advocacy that we'll be doing as well as far as next steps go.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anita. And I love cheese. So, any sort of support that you're able to provide us, because this fight is not over. This is a pause button. It's as I've described to friends, like, I feel like there was a floodgate and we've been able to at least put a bar on it for now. But in order for us to kind of dissipate the surge that might be behind that gate is something that's going to take continued action. And 2 pending ways in which we're dealing with that are 2 lawsuits. Many of you are familiar with them. The first is a lawsuit that we've supported 2 faculty members to stand up for their rights against the Cal State University's policy, which similarly added caste, relying on the same hateful rhetoric and falsified data of Equality Labs, which was behind SB 403. That case is pending. We had 4 claims, 2 based on religious freedom, free exercise and establishment clause, and then equal protection and due process as far as kind of classic civil rights clauses. Of the 4, the judge has determined that we have, or the faculty members have standing on 2. That is the due process claim as well as the establishment law claim. What that means in human talk, as opposed to legal talk, is that the government does not have a right to define a religion. And the way in which or it cannot show favor and by the opposite, disfavor towards a religion. And some of the language that was contained in the student resolutions and faculty resolutions that the CSU system depended on made false claims and painted Hinduism in a very negative light. So that establishment claim is one that the courts will hear. And then the second one is a due process claim, which means that laws basically or policies need to be clear in what the expectation is for the people who have to abide by a policy, but also it needs to be clear for those people who have to enforce it. And while the Cal State University system has defined things like race or sex or sexual orientation, it abstained from defining caste. And so that case is ongoing, and we eagerly await to see which way the judge rules. Now, you know, these legal arguments are novel legal arguments. So we oftentimes get asked, like, well, what about Seattle? And what about Brown University? Or what about all these other places? Look, litigation is, first of all, not inexpensive. We've been able to actually at least somewhat curb legal expenses had we not had 2 or 3 lawyers on our team that can help and work alongside our outside counsel. To date, what have we spent? Something like
$500,000 on that.
$500,000.
Yeah.
Yes.
I remember because I have to review every single legal bill.
That's right. That's right. I kind of try to avoid those bills, but Samir is there to kind of dot our I's and cross our T's, but $500,000, and we're not even at trial yet. This has been through the discovery process on both lawsuits, and we're prepared to take this all the way up to appeals. Some state agencies are required to appeal regardless of which way the decision may go. And so we're prepared to take this all the way up to the Supreme Court if we need to. But because these are novel legal arguments, I think a kind of step-by-step process to see what worked, what can we learn before we go to any other jurisdictions. I think one of the key things that we are really learning a lot about is standing. What standing means is that have you been harmed? Are you in a place where you should be allowed to seek some sort of justice? And it's a complicated legal concept, but we're learning a lot about this, just looking at kind of the preliminary decisions that have come forward in the CSU case, as well as the next case, which I want to talk about, which is the Civil Rights Department. Our case against the Civil Rights Department, we filed an amended complaint. As many of you may have heard, it was preliminarily dismissed by the judge on the basis of standing. Interestingly enough, we were already preparing to file an amended complaint. And so we were already ready to go, knowing that the court may try to kind of weasel out of the case in some sense, because look, these courts don't, especially a federal court, doesn't want to come in and make pronouncements about a state agency. So, there was a real possibility, and that's usually the first line of defense for any sort of defendant, is to claim that the plaintiff does not have standing. But we had already, after filing our case against the Civil Rights Department, a number of individuals had stepped forward, whether it was tech workers, Hindu American tech workers who were already facing stigma and harm as a result of the manner in which the Civil Rights Department had filed its case. We also had Sundar Iyer and Ramana Kompella join our case because they have directly been harmed. Many of you have heard the just heartbreaking testimony from Sundar Iyer as to what happened to him, in spite of doing his best to live up to the principles of our culture, do the right thing. And regardless, because he was Indian, he was targeted by the Civil Rights Department. And we've had a number of our own staff and HAF's leadership and supporters of HAF step forward to become plaintiffs. all of this was a manner, what it has done is it's better secured our arguments for standing. But more importantly, as an organization, because we're the Hindu American Foundation, we had really kind of honed in primarily on the religious angle of this, but now we're also able to hone in on the national origin or ethnicity angle of this. We've also been able to supplement our arguments with many of the hateful types of things that the CRD submitted in order to kind of validate its disfavorable view or its disparaging view of Hinduism. So we can share that press release for you all to be able to read the details of that complaint, but we're eagerly awaiting to see which way the court rules on that. And of course, not to forget, this is the federal claim. We still have our motion to intervene in state court, also related to the Civil Rights Department's case against Cisco. So those are three cases that we think we should hopefully go our way. And if not, we're ready to appeal until they go our way. And then we'll have more tools in our toolbox to really address some of the other discriminatory policies that we've seen popped up across the country. Samir, if you want to just talk a little bit about kind of the plans that we have. We've talked about the legislative and the executive outreach that we did to the state assembly, to the governors, to the other states that we're monitoring. But what about the community? Because regardless of whether we're able to knock out these caste policies at all levels of government or even in corporate America or college campuses, I think that there's a real vulnerability for our community because just like Sundar Iyer and Ramana Kompella faced false charges, that could be the reality for anyone in our community. Or on the flip side, they may face the hateful rhetoric that many of us have faced, where people are hurling casteist remarks about us. And so the argument would be that if they want caste protected, then they too cannot make hateful comments about Brahmins or so-called upper castes. So you want to talk a little bit about our plans going forward?
Yeah, sure. So just before I get to that, just one thing I just want to emphasize is that between our multiple lawsuits right now, we're kind of covering the gamut of the types of caste-related issues that we can anticipate coming up or have already come up. So what I mean by that is that although the underlying claims, the civil rights claims are very similar in that we're talking about violation of religious rights or we're talking about violations of due process, the actual causes of action are slightly different in that in the CSU case, it's stemming from policies. So it's a policy adopted by CSU around caste. That's going to be similar to what's happening in Seattle or Fresno. They're both government entities doing that. They're just different in that it's a city versus a college university system. But again, it's a government action. So that's the first thing. So that's why we don't feel that there's a need to rush into kind of just suing and trying to undo those policies at the same time, because this would help actually build a case for against some of those other policies that are happening. Yeah. And then if you look at the Cisco case where we're suing the CRD, the difference there is that how the state is now trying to define Hinduism much more clearly in its case, even though they have not adopted obviously any policies that in trying to make their false allegations against Sundar and Ramana and Cisco systems more broadly, they define Hinduism as inherently casteist. So that was more of government just very clearly violating that separation of church and state and trying to define religion, and in this case, particularly Hinduism. So that's a little bit about kind of what we're covering in terms of the range of caste-related issues that we've seen coming up. And that's also, again, why we don't feel the need to start suing and filing lawsuits in every single place that it may pop up, because we're going to anticipate that it's going to be happening in other places as well. And that kind of brings me to what we're trying to pivot to next from a legal advocacy perspective. And that is really capacity building. So right now it's basically Suhag and I mean, we're a 2-person show and the legal front, at least within HF. We do have obviously Nikhil Joshi, who has been very helpful on our national team and one of the co-founders of the organization, but we need more full-time staff to deal with these issues. So one of the things that we are working towards is building a Hindu American Legal Advocacy Center within HF. And that is going to mean building out additional team members like full-time paid staff, legal fellows, paid legal fellows, not just to deal with these issues around caste, but to deal with the proliferation of legal issues that we're seeing, whether it's on college campuses and how Hindu American students are being treated, or whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in people's HOA communities and being denied their basic rights to, for instance, have torans or other religious door hangings outside their doors. So there are a range of legal issues that our community faces. Obviously, caste is front and center right now, but this legal center, advocacy center, would take on so much more and would help us really empower the Hindu American community and be able to deal with a lot more of the issues that we're facing. Along those lines, what we are also aiming to do is to really start corporate outreach in a very systematic manner to help reach out to the legal departments, but also the HR departments to be able to provide materials, content, trainings, resources, and educate them, as well as law firms, because what we saw in anticipation of SB 403 being signed by the governor, which everyone thought was going to happen, we also saw a lot of law firms, employment law firms, putting out advisories talking about caste policies that were going to come in California. And we could already see from that language, there's a lot of coded racist language or bigoted language in there. So I think educating legal practitioners is also going to be very critical for us. And while Suhag and I, can do some of that, we really need to build out a full team along those lines. But
I'll just add, as I sat in on some of our depositions for the CSU case, what really comes through, and we've been monitoring, like Samir said, some of the HR advisories that have been coming. We cannot assume that just because an institution or corporation has a legal department that they actually understand the law. And I think we also learned that in all of our conversations with assembly members or with state senators. A lot of them are lawyers, but they don't, just because you're a lawyer, it doesn't mean that you remember everything about constitutional law. So it's a little bit like like a doctor. You don't go to a heart attack to a pediatrician because they maybe remember the basics, but they're not going to know the nuances. And I think that that's something that we've learned. So not only is it important from the worker side of things, but if and when members of the community are faced with some sort of allegation or need to allege something, in the dozens of conversations that we actually had with law firms, trying to find a law firm that would represent these two cases, we found that they too could not kind of snap out of that sixth grade pyramid that they learned about. And so even being able to find adequate representation could be an issue for our community. And that's something that we want to be proactive in addressing. And we've already seen hints of that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for mentioning that, Suhag. And the other piece of it is to empower all of you, empower the community by creating resources. So like Suhag mentioned, knowing what to do in a situation if it comes up in your workplace or in your school or somewhere else in some other situation, creating resources, creating trainings on how to deal with these issues. So this is kind of where we are now moving in our evolution in terms of our legal advocacy work, because we have to anticipate that this is only going to get worse, unfortunately. And we definitely anticipate that those that were behind SB 403 are going to continue to push these policies in the workplace, in universities, and are going to find other ways to connect caste to demonizing the Hindu American community. We've seen it with holidays being like Diwali, Holi, being demonized on college campuses. So it's definitely not going to stop. And so we have to stay one step ahead, and we have to continue to fight these attempts to demonize our community and silence our community. And one of the strongest tools we have is legal advocacy. And that's where we're going to be investing quite a bit of time, resources, and money over the next year at least. One thing before we open it up to questions, I just want to mention, and then we'll get to questions in just a minute, is that when I was talking about what we have done so far from just a staff perspective, I gave a number in terms of what we had spent on our legal advocacy work, and that just is our law firms that we've worked with. Not to mention the time and effort. And Sohag and I haven't calculated that. Even if we're giving the Guju discount, we're still, I would think, should be charging a little bit more money. But just on the advocacy on SB 403, we calculated some costs, approximately $300,000 through the investments in software systems, through the time expended. And so there's a lot of money and time that's been invested and that needs to be invested. I think that's why it's really critical that we get your support. Sohag can really talk about the importance of that. And then I promise we'll open it up to questions. But, why this funding is so important as somebody that was there from the beginning. So 20 years ago that founded HAF, one of the co-founders, and kind of how that's kept us going and how it's going to help us get to the next phase in our work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think what we've learned is that the challenges are getting more and more complex, and we need subject matter expertise. We need to be able to recruit and actually cultivate the next leaders that are going to be taking on these issues. Many of you may have seen, if you haven't been on our website, but HAF has grown. That's one other thing that we did on top of all of this, but we have been able to grow our staff, and we've really recruited some rock stars. So I invite you to go to our team page to see our new director of education, our community outreach director, or regional directors rather. And we need to still have more. If we compare us to other organizations, take CARE, for instance, the Council on American Islamic Relations, they have not just, just one of their chapters is out. We're outnumbered by staff, and our budget is their budget for just one chapter, as opposed to their national office, blows ours out of the water. And they are the ones who oftentimes pose challenges to us. If we want to be able to fight, we need to have more people that are going to be preparing the types of materials, the types of knowledge and skill training, the types of monitoring that we need to be doing, the types of relationships we need to be building at various state levels, as well as the federal level, to be able to counter the challenges and to ensure that we have a third and fourth generation of Hindu Americans who are proud of their heritage, who don't need to be hiding in the closet because they're Hindu, because there's the real danger of being labeled something that they're not, like a nationalist or a supremacist or an extremist. We all have seen that. Even for domestic policies, we see that these tropes of dual loyalty and double standards are being lodged at us. Why? Because they cannot argue against us on the merits of what we're saying. And so we need to expect that this is going to continue to happen, and we need all the resources of the community to push back against it. So with that, Samir, any closing remarks?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, again, I think this is a moment we should take the time to celebrate where we've come and the achievement that we've made collectively as a community. And at the same time, understand that we can't rest, we can't become complacent, that we have to continue to be vigilant. We have to continue to educate our friends, neighbors, coworkers on who we are as a community on these issues, help them better understand Hinduism and our traditions, and understand that caste has no part or place in our traditions or beliefs. Help them understand that these policies are dangerous, not just to us, but also to all Americans, and they're unnecessary and they create more problems. And with that, we're going to be absolutely following up with more resources and trainings, as was mentioned here. But finally, just would also urge you all to please continue to support HAF's work. We can't do that without your support. We can't continue to build and continue to move forward without funds. Very simply put, advocacy costs money. Legal advocacy costs even more money. As you know, lawyers are expensive. But again, a lot of these issues are fought through either legal action or through a legal, I don't want to say legal mind, but through legal tactics, right? And a legal frame of reference and a way to look at these issues. A lot of the language that was used in a lot of the advocacy campaigns around SB 403 was legal language that Suhag and I kind of worked on, the framing of these policies not being generally applicable and applying equally to everyone. So it's really important that we continue to build on the success and proactively stop what's definitely going to be coming, which is more. We should definitely anticipate that there's going to be more of these types of policies that are going to be pushed, whether in the workplace, whether in schools, or whether in state and city legislatures. So please support us generously with whatever you can, and continue to stay engaged with HAF on social media. If you want to join our WhatsApp groups, reach out to us. We can send you the link to join a regional WhatsApp group. Continue to come to our many other great events. We have a number of events in different parts of the country happening all the time. So please stay engaged, please stay active, and please support us generously. And thank you so much for joining us this evening. Namaste and good night.
Namaste.